Hi, I'm Wayne Tuttle, and welcome to Chasing Legends. Welcome back again this week. I'm Wayne Tuttle. I'll be your host. Please reach down, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell to find out when we're doing new videos or when anything's coming out. Go to the About section. You'll find our shirts and that stuff. And for represent.com, all right? And you can go to our website, legendofthesuperstitionmountains.com. One big word. You'll find the shirts, the hats, the coffee cups, all that stuff there, and other pertinent information, including every week or so we're updating more and more of the bark notes, and there will be more and more information like that we talk about, reference. So it's going to be a very cool place to go for archived old videos, not just our stuff, but old film and stuff like that. So moving from there, because that's just something we're offering up, and I don't think we have any sponsors. We're not making anything off of most of this stuff. So therefore, you're just getting this stuff as we're just reaching out and trying to just make people more aware, help it along. So this week, we're going to go into something, and this is one of those ones that kind of dovetails. It's two different things, but they kind of mix together in one thing. I wish I could tell you the year. I'm going to think I'm 12 or 13. The person I could call and tell this to is no longer with us. The other person I could call and talk about this with is no longer with us. So it's one of those, I remember it. I remember doing it. I don't remember where. I don't remember exactly when. But I do remember. I'm probably 12 or 13, and I don't think I would have been any younger. And my dad had asked me, hey, he was going across town. He said he's going, some guy was giving a talk, or going to give a talk, lecture on something to do with the Superstition Mountains or something. I thought, oh. He said, do you want to come along? And I was like, yeah, because at this point, I'd been into the mountains probably for 3 or 4 years at that point, a few years. So I had a number of books and stuff. Primarily Ely's book, Storm's book, Gentry's Killer Mountains. Would have had the Barney Barnard book at that point. A couple other things, but a lot of the literature we talk about and was still to come in the next few years, over the next few years. So there was very limited material. There was some brochures and stuff you could pick up, but as far as a lot of the books, I don't think I had a copy of Blair or Jennings yet or anything like that. So I was really still in the discovery stage. I had some of the books I had, probably 4, 5, 6 books of some type or another. And then I had whatever I could pick up off newspapers or whatever else. And then the time I had in the mountains. So I looked forward to this because I had a lot of questions. And here someone's going to be talking about the mountains and stuff. So I remember when we went across town. It was in the East Valley. And it probably was in either Mesa or Apache Junction. And I don't know if it was a VFW hall, a Moose Elks Lodge, a cafeteria. It was a room. There was fold-out chairs all put up, and everything was lined in the room. And we got there, and it was mainly adults. There was some couples, but it was my dad had the friend, and they had met up there. And we went in, and I don't know if they paid. I don't know if there was a ticket. I knew we went in, and we sat to the outer side of the row we were in, which was probably about halfway back. My dad said, if we sit in that row, you can sit on the very end seat. And you sit there, and then if you need to stand up, you can kind of move to the side and stand up to see over everybody if you can't see what's going on or hear. And he said that should be fine. So he wanted me to be able to kind of hear and listen to what I was going to do. And like I said, I was at that age where usually you're just like, is it over yet? Is it done? But the gentleman got up and started speaking, and there was a slideshow. And he was showing some slides, and he would talk about things. And I was hearing about things that I'd heard of before. A lot of places I knew of that we'd been into the mountains at, and places I'd read about. And I couldn't tell you how long it went. It seemed like it didn't last very long, but it probably lasted a while. Because I was completely tuned in to everything going on. And it was kind of not the same as my first trip in the mountains, But it had an impact on me as I was like, wow, there's actually people that read this stuff and listen to it and talk about it. And of course, I'm looking around and I'm seeing all these people. I'm like, there's other people interested in this stuff. So it kind of had like a big kind of moment for me of like, man, this is kind of cool. I didn't know you feel like you're the only person really into something, and then once in a while you run into other people, but there's a whole room of these people. So they finished, they had a little bit, talk, ask questions and answers, and that people started talking a bit, and I couldn't quite hear that, but the person who gave the talk was very, very patient. And I was surprised. So got done, everything was finished up, people were milling about. My dad walked up, and I don't know who they went to talk to, but the gentleman who'd given the talk was up front. And I walked up, and I wasn't a little kid, but I was still quite young. And I looked up to this guy who was like 10 feet tall, and I looked up to about, and I asked him a bunch of questions about what he'd talked about. And you kind of fully expect, and you want to always remember, is like generally people like that are a bit dismissive. I'd never met him. I just went up and kind of waited and was there, and then he turned and saw, and I was just looking at him, and he just kind of bent over a little, and it was very intimidating because of how tall he was. But he looked down, and I started asking the questions I had about some things related to what he said, but a couple things that I'd read from books and stuff. And he answered my questions. And everybody was kind of loud, so he kind of leaned over, and he kept answering my questions, and he was looking at me as I talked. And he was very thoughtful in his answers. I have no idea really who this guy is. So we got done with it and all, and we went to leave, and I remember there was some things up there or whatever, and there was like a pamphlet or something that this guy had written, and it had the name, because I figured it was this guy because it sat there, and I picked it up, and I was very confused. This is for the next year or so, because I didn't know who this guy was, because it seemed to be this guy's name was James Colton, but it seemed like his name was Tom Kollenborn. And I thought, were there two different guys? And I was further confused because it was probably within a year or so he started to write with Jim Swanson. Now the books are Tom Kollenborn and Jim Swanson. And when Ride Time came out, it was Tom Kollenborn and Jim Swanson, but it had the chapters about James Colton. So I'm trying to figure out if one guy is this guy or that guy, or which guy's which. Is James really Jim Swanson, or is he James Colton, or is who that? And then I was finally able to figure it out later. But that was when I first met Tom, and it had kind of a little bit of an impact because now I didn't know he was a school teacher and his background in education and a number of other things. I thought he was just some guy into this that went around and talked to people about it. Had no idea who he was. But it had an impact because I was like, oh, this guy knows a lot about the mountains, and he seems to have some history back in the mountains, and there seemed to be other people and shared, and it kind of probably started drawing my interest in the history and wanting to know more than the books I had, because probably at that time I wasn't looking for more books. At this point, now I'm starting to think, okay, there's got to be more books. He's referenced things. I need to see this stuff. I need to know more what's going on. So it was probably a year or so later we went, and there was another thing, and it wasn't quite a lecture or something, but Tom spoke at it. And I remember we got to speak with him again, and again I walked over. Tom wouldn't know me from Adam at that point still, but I got to go over and ask him a few other questions. And at this point, I think he's starting to do more newspaper articles and stuff. And I think he was leaving the James Colton thing behind and now becoming more Tom Kollenborn. And I was kind of working it out, realized this guy's Tom Kollenborn. And again, he was so nice. He was gracious. He just talked to me like I was an adult, which I didn't feel like I was. I expected, growing up around a lot of the cowboys I did and all, and while I don't have any bitterness toward them, they didn't treat you kind of like you knew anything, that you knew dirt. And yet Tom was always very attentive and just listening to what you had to say and answered you like he was not trying to explain it, like he was giving you the answer to your question. And I appreciated it a lot, and I walked away again, and I thought, wow, these Dutch hunters are such wonderful, nice guys. Little did I know. So that became, and then the book Ride Through Time came out, and I started reconciling that Tom Kollenborn is actually James Colton, and that's the same guy, and all this stuff. But that was my first time meeting him, and then there was just a couple instances where I'd run into him. And when I did again, I was still shied away from it all because, one, Tom was very tall, and it could seem very intimidating, and he was very soft-spoken to me. But I always was just like, man, I can't believe this guy is important as he writes books, he does talks, he does this, he rides in the mountains. He's like the expert. He'll take the time to talk to me and answer my questions. Then you spool it forward, 20 some odd years. And I suddenly am sitting at campfires and getting to sit around or stop by or on the telephone talking to Tom. And it really, at first, I think with Randy and I both, it was just kind of almost intimidating. Again, I felt like a small child because I felt like Tom was so many light years ahead of anything I could think of or anything I could approach that it was hard for me sometimes to talk to him because I would ask him a question and listen, and I didn't want to ask follow-up questions, which I learned to do. But at first, I would walk away with more questions than answers he could give, because I just didn't want to be rude. I didn't want to be ungrateful. I didn't want to say anything else. And yet he was always really, really very nice. I got more and more comfortable with Tom, obviously, but probably most of the comfort was when we would show up in camp. We did a climb one day, and I took Trevor out with me. And we got up the side of the mountain and pretty much beat Trevor almost half to death. And we came down the mountain, and I think there was several 8-10 foot drops that he had to slide down rocks. He cut himself up bad. He was bruised. He was filthy. I think the last stretch before we got back to camp, there was a section where instead of going the long way around, I told him we're just going to crawl through the cat claw. So we had to get hands and knees, and right now he is nodding his head because he remembers how awful that was, crawling as the cat claws pulling at us, but we crawled through the cat claw for probably about 20 yards. Got back to camp, and Trevor, believe would wore shorts. So he was literally shredded head to toe. And we got in, and I know there's no harm. It's like some Bactine and some soapy water. He's going to be fine. But he's very young. He couldn't have been older than 7 or 8. Maybe even, I think 6, 7, 8, somewhere in there. Got to camp. I remember Carolyn Roboto was like, oh, poor boy, and all this stuff. And Sharon Kollenborn turned and looked at him and said, he's a boy. He'll be all right. Just give him something to drink and a cookie, and he'll just shut up. And Tom looked over and said, yeah, looks like he'll be fine. And next thing I know is Trevor was sitting there sipping on like an apple juice or something and had a cookie, and he was just fine as dandy. They patched him up a little bit, but he kind of got over it. He was very tired and went to bed very early that night. I think he didn't even ask to go to sleep. I just looked over in a chair and he was asleep. And then I got him up to go to lay down, and he slept through the night really good. But again, all through my life, even after that pattern, I always wondered, because you'll say sometimes, did someone recognize something in you? Oh, Tom recognized you as a Dutch hunter. But he was the same way with Trevor. And whenever he saw Trevor, he'd always greet Trevor. He'd talk to Trevor, ask him how he was doing school, how things were going. If Trevor posted anything on Facebook about his schoolwork, anything he was accomplishing in school and stuff, Tom had nothing but compliments for him. When we would always sit around and talk, he took time to talk to Trevor about his education, what he was planning to do with his education, what he was planning, to do in the future, and encouraged him. And even my daughter, the 1 time or 2 times she came to the rendezvous, he did the same for her, asking her, talking to her. And I realized that was part of Tom's nature. As people always sometimes say, as the Dutch hunter or within the circle of things, he might have been a little different, but to people he knew, and definitely people he got to know and their families, he was very, very kind. And I loved that as I got older, as I realized, wow, I see how he's speaking to my children like he spoke to me. And then, of course, by that point, I had gotten comfortable enough to have some really good conversations with Tom, where I never really questioned what he was talking to me about. I learned to ask the questions to kind of get more knowledge or understanding of things. And sometimes, you know, where Trevor's film Sunsets comes from is that we'd have discussions a bit about the psychology of the people that search for treasure and the Dutch hunters and the people in the history, because what made them do this? Sometimes they've almost abandoned families, or they've left their families and went to the mountains, or what was the whole point of the dreaming in different eras, because different eras would mean it means something different. And I loved those talks. Those were some of my best talks I ever had with him, those moments where we would just be alone for a little bit. And it necessarily wasn't on Jacob Waltz and the Lost Dutchman, but it kind of got into the psychology of people and why they do what they do. And he was such an interesting man, because we had conversations about cars. He loved conversations about guitars and music. And we would have these little sidebar conversations occasionally about things. And I found out more and more we just kept having things, certain things in common. We didn't directly follow the same path in life. We didn't have the same exact bands or musicians we liked, but we both liked music, and we liked it personally for our own reasons, for the same ways. And I'll never forget Frank sitting down with us, and me and Tom and another friend of his, Keith, we were sitting there, and we got into a really long discussion. We were talking about Fenders and Stratocasters, and then a little bit about Gibson guitars and the Luthers and all this type of stuff. And Frank got up and said, "I can't take this anymore," and left. But we were having this great conversation, and Tom was great at that. He was so well-rounded and knowledgeable that you could do that. So I always look back and remember as a kid, the first time I met him, that person I met from the very first instance, who had no reason to introduce himself or talk. He could have just brushed me off. There were more important people. There were probably a lot more. It wasn't because it was me or he saw anything as special in me. That was how he generally treated people. And you have to not only respect that, but it had a lot of bearing on me. And where people would always look later and say, well, you know, you and Randy we were both well liked, but Randy was more the smiley, happy-go-lucky guy. And I was, as Randy would tell you anytime, I was the one that had more of the temperament and the fuse, and I was the asshole. And as time goes by, when you meet someone like Tom, you learn to temper it with stuff, because people like Tom Kollenborn and Clay Worst, Bob Schuss even, you learn to deal with people much differently. And I learned a lot from them, because, you know, I looked at how they handled those things. And, you know, there is always the custom problem of that. You know, people are going to just like pile on and not let go because you're too kind. But Tom was always very kind. And that first meeting is very important. I know there was a couple times they would go in and have camp, and someone who knew him or knew someone he knew, it could have been Archie Johnson or Bud Lane or someone else, and Tom would stop by, and he always dressed the same. He always had that same straw cowboy hat on. He always had the button-up shirt, and if it was cooler out, I always had that little vest thing on. And but he'd come by, and, you know, to me, the big thing was, you know, if you ever thought Clint Eastwood was 10 feet tall and Good, Bad, and the Ugly, that's where I saw Tom. Even till the very end, he was still just so tall. I mean, I don't know if he was 6'4", 6'5", but Tom was just lanky and tall, and you would stand there talking to him. But he had that very gentle way about him that you never felt intimidated by it, except when I was a child. And I was like, holy crap. But no, and I wanted to share that, because, you know, I've talked about sharing things about Dutch hunters, and especially the ones I've met and I got to know. And he was probably one of the earliest people I met that I know who he was, because I would meet him later in life, and we would develop a friendship. But a lot of guys I met and I don't have any recollection of, and I could say, oh, I think I might have met him. But there's nothing I have or anything. And I, even before my dad passed away, talked to him. Do you remember any names of any of these guys we ran across or came in and out of the camps? And he couldn't. So I always want to shy away from that, say, well, I'm sure at the Lost Dutchman store, Bob Ward or somebody like that, or Chuck Crawford was around when we came in and out. But I can't say that for sure. I'm sure I crossed paths. But as a small kid, unless I really had direct one-on-one interaction, I didn't remember people. And the reason I remember Tom was like larger than life, and he took the time to really kind of listen to me and answer my questions. So I've never forgotten that, and that's probably one of the reasons I probably ended up in the Dutch hunting community and doing what I did, was when someone takes that time and you learn from them like that, you continue to carry it on. And from that point forward, it more and more drove me, as I wanted to get in the mountains. I wanted to kind of learn this stuff and, you know, kind of understand that. And of course, Tom around that time started to publish and put out more and more books and pamphlets and other materials. So there you go. So another week of chasing legends. We'll be back again this Friday. I don't know what we'll be doing. Maybe archival. Maybe we'll do live. Live's kind of like, if you do live one after another, it's a little too much. It's, you know, you can answer X amount of so many questions. If other people have stories to kind of interject or questions on stuff that's off topic, that's good. This last week I looked for more material because I wanted chasing legend stuff. Was what do people want to hear about? And a lot of times they're picking stuff that one of the other channels does, and I don't mind doing that, and I will touch upon some of the stuff they've covered because I have to go and look and listen to what they said, and sometimes I'm confused because their title of what I'm expecting and what people are starting talking to me about, I think, oh, they told that story already. Why do I need to tell it? And then I go there and realize they didn't really tell that story the way I know it, or it's documented or anything. It was kind of a little all over the place. So I'll do that just to put it on record and properly title those things and stuff like that. So but yeah, I wanted some kind of like fresh avenues, and there is tons, but I wanted what people were looking for, what they were listening for, what they were reaching for. So we will be getting into that, and we'll be doing Chasing Legends. And as I said before, I want to kind of drive that lane. This was a little bit of a cross-reference talking about Tom and, you know, my own personal history, but I want to get in some about these guys and their personal histories with me, and some of them where I didn't know them, about their histories in the mountains and so forth, because I think it's important to remember these guys because they've left us such a legacy. Definitely Tom, Ron Feldman has, Thomas Glover has, Barry Storbit. A lot of these guys left quite the legacy for us to read and continue on and kind of understand. So I want to touch upon some of that. So there you go. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody this week. Hope everybody enjoys their turkey day and enjoys some football and sitting back and taking the big long nap on the couch and everything else. And we'll catch you again this Friday for something. Meanwhile, we'll be spooling it up and getting ourselves back out in the mountains more and more and kind of getting some good time out there and see what we can dig up and finish up on a few things. So we'll see what we do up in the mountains and where we go. And Frank, me, and Trevor are all in. I know Frank just recently made a little trip out there with Jack Sanfelice, who seems to be doing pretty well. So, hey, great to see you, Jack, and you got out there with Frank and had some fun, I hope, that day. Woody Wampler made his couple of weeks in the Superstitions, and I don't know how well he did overall. Got kind of crossed different things because you can never trust a prospector what he says, how much gold he got. But anyways, I know Woody had a really good time, and he's home safely and all and everything for the holidays, so that's all good and everything else. So until the next time, remember, this is Chasing Legends. I'm Wayne Tuttle. You're not. And have a great Thanksgiving. Take care.